All right, welcome to C1. We're talking about conference proposals and presentations and also a little bit about posters. First of all, some announcements for those of you who are doing the certificate. One, if you've given me some documents, I've got some to hand back to you, assuming I haven't forgotten them. If you're doing the certificate, you came to the small group workshop a while ago. I do need either hard copies or electronic copies of everything, so I can at least check my records. So if you didn't give it to me after the small group workshop, be sure to give me a hard copy and an electronic copy of your sample syllabus and CV, and then other documents you should send me before you do micro-teaching. We'll be doing micro-teaching around or after finals time. We'll be sending you some information about that. Again, if you're doing your certificate, we would encourage you to finish all of that this semester, because you'll probably forget about it over the break, or it'll kind of drift from your consciousness and you won't finish it. So it's better, if you really want to do it, then do it this semester. If you can't finish it, that's okay. Keep coming to these seminars and learn anyway. So again, you can give me hard copies or electronic copies of your work. I need to check off the fact that you've done it and that you've done it to my satisfaction. I might tell you, okay, this is good enough, or I might tell you, please revise this. I'll give you some suggestions. Please revise it and resend it to me, because all of these documents do need to be professional quality if you're going for the certificate. And if you're new here and you don't know about the certificate, don't worry. Just come to the seminars. So today we're going to talk about conference proposals, doing conferences. Why do you do conferences? As grad students, why should you be going to conferences? Why should you be trying to present at conferences? What's the purpose? Let me ask you, why should you be doing conferences as a grad student? What do you think?
You might want to present your work to peers and get evaluated.
Okay, present your work, get some feedback. There's probably a lot of things that they can tell you that maybe your advisor, your professor may not know. They may know about other research that's going on. Maybe they have some different ideas. So it helps to get feedback on your work. What are other reasons to do the conference thing in grad school? Yes, it's a first step towards publishing, and it's really important. If you want to do an academic career, if you want to become a professor, you really have to go to conferences. Present some of your early research, learn how to, for the sake of learning just how to do research, get feedback on your research, maybe do some preliminary research, even master's level research, that's good. Present it at a conference, get some feedback, learn kind of what it's like to do and present research, and then later you can start publishing, maybe based on feedback you get from the conference, get some ideas, refine it. You might start publishing in small, maybe domestic journals, and then work your way up to the international journals. So it's the first step in doing research, and the first step in getting published is by doing conferences. Okay. For some conferences, they actually publish proceedings. This depends on the field, but in the more science fields and some more very quantitative social science fields, like psychology, they also publish conference proceedings. I didn't bring mine. I've been publishing some. At some conferences, you just present a paper and that's it. Maybe they print the abstract of your conference presentation in a booklet, the conference booklet. But at some conferences, they actually publish proceedings where you submit maybe a 4-page paper, a summary of your work. And this is kind of a minor publication. It may not count towards getting hired as a professor, but it's a minor publication, and it's a way to get started with publishing. Oftentimes people will present preliminary research findings at a conference maybe write up the conference paper and get that published, and then based on their feedback and experience, maybe do more full analysis of their data, and that can later become a publishable paper in a journal. Okay, other reasons for doing conferences. Networking, yes. Networking is important. Why is it important? Well, one, maybe years later, these might be people that will be helpful for getting a job. That's one reason. But not necessarily something so selfish. Networking just to get to know colleagues in the field and knowing about the kind of research that other people are doing, getting them familiar with your research, getting your name out there, meeting interesting people. It could come and help, could be very helpful someday in your future, even if it doesn't lead directly to getting a job. It's still very helpful just to know. Like if you're interviewing for a job and you can say, well, I talked to Professor so-and-so at this conference last year, and just the information you get from hearing other people's research can also be good for your research and for your job futures. Okay, so even if you're an introvert like me, it's still good to do some of this networking, just getting to know other people out there. It might give you an idea that, hey, people from this school are doing research on this. Maybe someday I might like to do a postdoctoral position there, or get a job there, or things like that. You get to know the field. You get to know who is doing what kind of research. And all of this can be valuable for your own research and perhaps for getting a job someday. Any others? Okay, those are kind of the main reasons. And again, also practice with public speaking, presenting your research, trying to persuade people about how good your research is. Those kinds of skills are important later for doing a job talk, job interview, getting a job, presenting your research, and such. When you go to conferences, there are kind of two basic options. This depends on your field. You might actually get to present a paper, and this might not be a full paper you've written. It depends on your field, kind of how this works. You might have actually written a paper that's going to be published in the conference proceedings. If not, you can still put on your CV, paper presented at, because there's theoretically some kind of paper behind this, or a paper you're working on. So it might be an actual presentation, or sometimes they call it a paper presentation, even if there isn't an actual physical paper involved. In some conferences, especially in some of the science fields or some of the very quantitative social sciences, you might first start doing posters, a poster presentation. And then later on, maybe you actually do a talk later when you've got some better data or better research. So how many of you have been to a conference? Okay. Even if you haven't presented, at least just go to a conference in your field and just find out what it's like. And so then maybe after that you'll feel inspired to try to submit something to a conference. Go to a conference and see what it's like, see what they're doing. How many of you have presented, as in doing a talk at a conference? Who's done that? Okay, a couple of people. Who has maybe done a poster presentation? Okay, that's in some fields, a poster. Okay. I know, for example, some psychology conferences, medical health science conferences and such, they have poster sessions. This is kind of often for more preliminary research, or kind of a starting point for initial research. Basically be a big room with walls, or cubicle style walls, and there'll be like these big posters, and it's kind of an informal style. There'll be the people who've done their research, and they produce this big poster which summarizes their research and the results, and you just walk up to them and they explain to you what they've done, what they've got, and you ask them questions, you get to know them, and then you just walk around the room, and people are basically presenting their research. And if you're a poster presenter, you basically have kind of a 1 or 2 minute summary about your research that's on your poster. You explain to people, so people keep coming to you and you explain, in a 1 or 2 minute summary. Maybe they want to ask more questions and you have more detailed questions. I've got a template. Oftentimes for a poster presentation, people use a PowerPoint. Now, different conferences might specify what kind of size they want, and there are different PowerPoint templates out there. So it's basically a PowerPoint template. This is one I did. This was at a psycholinguistics conference I did some years ago. So this is really just a big PowerPoint file. In this case, there's these nice columns, and it should look really nice and readable. And basically you produce this file, you take it to maybe a print shop, and they will produce it in the desired size. It's usually like 1 or 2 meters, 1 or 2 square meters, and you take it with you to the conference and you put it up on the poster board. Different conferences will maybe tell you what they want. If it's in the US, then be careful, because they'll give you they'll use those silly English units like inches, which I hate. I'm from the US, but I hate the fact that we're using inches and miles and feet and Fahrenheit. It's so ancient. So watch out for that. So you might do a poster presentation at some conferences, or you might actually give a talk. Oftentimes you have maybe 15 or 20 minutes for the talk itself, and maybe 5 minutes to answer questions from the audience. And so you should go to conferences first and find out just what it's like. And then you can actually present at conferences. So let me ask you a question. If you're going to a conference, or if you've been to a conference, what makes for a good presentation, whether it's a talk or a poster? What makes for a good presentation or a bad presentation? Okay. So what makes for a good conference talk or a bad one? Or maybe a good or bad poster. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, talk to each other, especially if you've been to a conference. What makes for a good conference presentation or poster? What is going to make it bad? Okay. Let's come back together. So what are some ideas? What makes for a good or bad conference presentation? If you've been to a conference, you probably heard some really good talks, some mediocre talks, and maybe some really bad ones. Okay, so what makes for a good or bad conference talk presentation? Yes?
One thing, you should try to keep people concentrate and focus on the speech. Like, if you speak too much, or if the post is crowded, it could be difficult to follow what you mean.
Okay.
Or if you look at too much also PPT, it's very boring.
Okay. Nobody wants a pure PPT lecture, right? It's boring. And I've shown you this picture before. This, all you have to do is do a Google image search for something like PowerPoint death or PowerPoint overdose. You see some cute pictures like this. This is common. A lot of people who go to conferences are maybe inexperienced presenters, grad students, new professors, and they do a poor job of presenting over, maybe they abuse the PowerPoint. Or you also mentioned too much content. This is typical of inexperienced teachers or presenters, conference presenters. They try to present too much content, and that ends up killing you. And so if you have 20 minutes, and that's 15 for the talk and 5 minutes for the questions, they end up spending the whole 20 minutes for the talk. You don't have time for questions or getting feedback. And if you do that, you're cheating yourself. You could get some interesting feedback, some suggestions, some ideas from the audience, but you don't, because you've bored them for 20 minutes, and they're not going to want to give you any helpful suggestions afterwards. And they may not take you very seriously. If you do a good presentation or a good poster, they may be interested in your work, and maybe years later they might remember your presentation. They might want to Google you and find if you've published something that they can cite, and they might want to cite you if you do a good presentation or a good poster. So it's good for your career if you are careful about that. And so new presenters tend to be overambitious, and we'll talk about this kind of thing later. Not to be overambitious about your talk, not to do too much. PowerPoint, focusing too much on the PowerPoint, where the PowerPoint dominates. No audience interaction. And this is true for teaching, also in public speaking skills, as we'll talk about later. How do people abuse the PowerPoint? Too much content in the PowerPoint. PowerPoints are not designed for a lot of content. It is simply not a medium that's appropriate for a lot of information. It was never intended to be a medium for conveying a lot of information. If you have a lot of information, give people a website where they can download your paper. If it's a poster, give them a paper handout of your poster, by the way, so they can take it with them. You know, this has a lot of information. When it's printed out on a full poster that's kind of big, it doesn't look so bad when it's printed out. Here on the screen this looks crowded, but this is well organized. By the way, you see 3 columns. It's nicely organized into the introduction, the method, the results, and the implications, conclusions, future analysis. Okay, it's really neat. If you're doing PowerPoint slides for a talk, your slides should be simple. They should be neat, not too much stuff in them. Keep your graphics relatively simple or uncrowded. Make them big enough so that the text or graphics should be big enough on each slide so people can easily see it. And don't put a lot of, this is a poster, so that a lot of text here is okay, because you'll hopefully have a printout to give to people, and then they'll take it home and they might want to cite you or look you up later. But in a PowerPoint, not a lot of text. Keep your text simple, key terms, key data, outlines, key points and such, but not too much text. Because otherwise, you'll be doing this. You'll be talking to your PowerPoint and not talking to the audience. That's one thing that leads to PowerPoint death. Okay, what are some other things you thought of? Yes?
One thing I also found out was that sometimes the person has made a presentation, is well organized, but then they end up speaking so much that they get to the point where they don't really, their body language, when you are presenting, at some point you want the people to look on the screen. At some point you want them to look at you.
Yes.
And so you are not able to coordinate it so well that people just lose track of it.
Okay.
But I really like Steve Jobs, like his presentations, and go 2 hours, but he does very, very good work.
Yes, and he doesn't use PowerPoint, by the way, because that's his enemy. But he uses, was it AppleWorks or whatever it's called, but he does very, very simple graphics when he did presentations. But yes, sometimes you want them just to look at you. Sometimes you want them to pay attention to the slide, and there are ways of doing that. But most of all, it should be you giving the presentation, not the PowerPoint. So you want to pay attention to your audience. When we'll talk about some of these skills in a few minutes, but you want them to pay attention to you. You look at the audience, you talk to them. You don't talk to the screen. Occasionally I look at the screen, but I look back at you, and I talk to you. And this is something I've learned from years of teaching. Also in teaching, I don't use PowerPoint anyway, but I only use PowerPoint if I do a conference presentation, or occasionally in one of these seminars I might use PowerPoint, but that's it. Okay, what are some other contents again? Too many contents, and so they might have good stuff, but they talk too much. One reason is you might feel a need to explain too much, especially background information. So maybe you want to keep background information to a minimum. You can assume that your audience members are advanced grad students, professors. There's a certain amount of knowledge you can probably assume that they have. You only need to give only the most important background information. But as soon as possible, you should get to describing your research and what you did. And do it concisely. Sometimes the research methods you can explain pretty quickly, concisely, because they probably know basic research methods. Or if you're more humanities, they probably know some of the theories or models or ideas that you're working with. So get as quickly as possible past the introduction and background to your research or to your work and what you've done, and explain that and explain why it's interesting or important. Okay, other things. Are there good points, bad points? Anything else? You've been to conferences? How about you?
Well, I was thinking about what you just kind of said, like being concise, and I think that everything is based on how much you have prepared and how much you know about your field.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, if you do enough reading up, you would know the normal knowledge basis that you can expect from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most important thing in a conference talk is that you should show what is new and like what is unknown
Mm-hmm.
and what is new from your research.
Yes. And if you spend too much time talking about background or methodology, you don't have enough time to get to that. Or you might get to that, but you're not really practiced or rehearsed enough, and you don't know how to explain it really persuasively or convincingly or clearly. So you really want to focus on what is unique about my research. What am I presenting that's really interesting or new that people should care about? Why should people care about that? That's something you want to rehearse and practice. You want to practice adequately for your presentation, and you want to rehearse by focusing on really what is new, what's your new research, what are your findings, why is it important, why is it cool, why should people care about it? And those things should be the focus, because you only have maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to explain this stuff. Okay. Anything else? Other thoughts?
Another thing sometimes with the order, the way you arrange them, it should be such that it should be coherent.
Mm-hmm.
So that like you don't keep switching, like when people are following, suddenly there's a change of thought and it's very difficult to follow.
Okay, and that's why I don't like PowerPoint, but one thing where a PowerPoint can be helpful is a well-designed PowerPoint can be a good outline that keeps you on track. If you don't use a PowerPoint, at least maybe have in your hand a well-organized notes or an outline that you're talking from. And then practice enough so that you can deliver it in an organized, coherent manner. Other bad things I've seen occasionally people read from their paper. Graduate students work within scientific, like that. I've actually endured a few conference presentations or graduate seminars like that. Very boring. Don't ever read from your notes. Don't read from your PowerPoint, but practice so that you can deliver by talking naturally to people. Koreans especially might try to memorize a presentation and deliver from memory. Is that a good idea? No, because your brain is doing two things. You should be focusing on the content of your talk, but if you try to memorize it, your brain is then focusing on the content, but then also the language. Or you're worried about your English and you're focusing too much on your grammar, vocabulary. Okay, forget about the English. That's something you deal with during rehearsal. You rehearse your delivery, you rehearse the language, but you don't try to memorize it. If you either are focusing on your English while you're talking, your brain is dual tasking, you're focusing on language and contents, that's going to make you make mistakes. Or if you try to memorize it, again, your brain is focusing on the language you've tried to memorize, and then your brain is trying to focus on the contents. That's going to distract you. You'll make mistakes. You'll get nervous, or you'll speak quickly, or just reading from your notes. You'll fall into this boring monotone voice and bore people, and you don't want to bore people. It's not good for your career as a new grad student. So those kinds of things you want to avoid. Those kinds of issues you do during your rehearsal. You practice and rehearse beforehand and work on your language, your delivery and such. Instead of memorizing, you have good outlines, whether it's on paper that you're holding in front of you. But again, don't look at your paper, look at the people. Occasionally look at the paper and look at the people. Or maybe it's an outline in the form of your PowerPoint, whatever, but you speak naturally and freely from your knowledge of the contents. You're focusing on the contents. You might have an outline here on paper, or your PowerPoint serves as an outline. You occasionally look at that and look back and speak freely and naturally, not reading aloud from notes or from a PowerPoint. And so these are common mistakes, especially new presenters, new speakers. Now, I want to also, I'll briefly talk about posters. Posters should also be nicely organized. You can look at this. This is one template. There are different size templates. You can easily do a Google search and find different size PowerPoint templates for creating a poster if you use those in your field. It's nicely organized. When it's printed out, it's nice and readable. Again, you also have hard copies. If you do dark background for your poster, reverse the color so that when you hand out paper copies, it's not all black and they're not getting inky. This is a white background, which is good for printing. If you like to do dark background, keep in mind that when you print out a poster, it might be harder to read. You might have to make the text bigger. But if you do that, also when you print it, reverse the colors so that you're not handing people printouts, paper printouts that are full of ink and toner and chemicals that are probably not good to breathe in. And that's going to burn through your toner cartridge when you're printing out 50 handouts and such on your laser printer. Little things like that can be helpful. Occasionally I've seen people do posters like this. Instead of a proper, it's like usually like half a meter or a meter this way, and maybe kind of an aspect ratio, maybe 1 to 2. It's a little bit longer, kind of like that, kind of like an A2 size or something. But I have seen people do this at least linguistics conferences. And instead of a proper poster, they'll print out paper, posterize it into a bunch of sheets of paper, and just tape them up like that. That looks really sloppy, unprofessional. Don't do that. Spend the money to go to a print shop and print out a proper poster size. And again, find out from the conference if they have any specifications about the particular size or dimensions that might specify that. Otherwise, find a typical size that's used either in Korea or North America and such, and take it with you. I don't remember what I paid to print out the poster here. Might have been $30 or something, I don't know. But spend the money on a nice poster printout and the paper printouts to give to people. So, again, first just visit a few conferences and find out what it's like, and then start submitting some of your research. So you might start at domestic conferences, maybe held here locally, that are mainly for Koreans. That's a good start. Then after you've presented at that, maybe you can work up to international conferences. There are sometimes international conferences here, or go to Canada, US, Europe, whatever, and do international conferences. So you want to maybe, for domestic conferences or international conferences that are held here, what you can do to find out is, one, ask your advisor, your professors about conferences that happen here in Korea and start there. Or when you talk about publishing, I talked about KCI. And so domestic journals in Korea, they're often published by some organization or society, professional societies, made up of professors and grad students and other researchers who publish a journal. And these same societies often sponsor conferences, and they send out conference announcements. So this is an index for domestic journals, and you can look up journals in your field by subject, and they'll give you the website for the society or organization that publishes these journals, and you can go to their website and then find out conferences that they do, or at least get on there, join those organizations and get on their mailing list and get information about conferences that are happening that they're involved with in Korea. And then the same for also international organizations. Find the international scholarly organizations in your field, get on their mailing list, find out about conferences internationally. And then from time to time, these societies will issue a call for conferences, or you'll find a conference website or website for the society, and they'll have a notice, call for proposals for conference. And they might call it abstract, they might call it proposal, more or less the same thing. Basically, you submit an abstract or a proposal to the conference for something you want to present, your research that you want to present. Abstract proposal for conference, kind of interchangeable. Maybe a proposal sounds more like maybe it's not quite finished yet, but I'm far along enough, I have a good idea where it's going and I can write up a proposal. An abstract is more like if something is already finished, I've already finished this research and I'm ready to present it. More or less interchangeable. An abstract has more this idea of finality, I finished it and these are my findings I can specify. Or if it's more proposal-like, it's maybe more like I'm not quite finished, but these are the things I will talk about. I will address these implications or findings and such, whatever. But it's somewhat interchangeable. Nonetheless, you write up a proposal or an abstract. It's maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs or maybe a page. They'll usually tell you a word length. In some fields, it might be significantly longer. I think medical proposals might be longer and maybe more structured, where they went to your, just like this poster, maybe your abstract is going to specify method and design and results and such. But in other fields, it's usually just a couple of paragraphs. So what happens? You have some research, you write up a proposal, and you send it to the conference, you submit it to the conference. What happens to your proposal or abstract? Same thing, whatever. It will usually go to about 3 reviewers. The person in charge of this at the conference will send it to 3 reviewers according to their area of expertise. These are usually professors. Occasionally they might be advanced graduate students. When I was a PhD student, when I was a very advanced PhD student, I served as a reviewer for a regional linguistics conference in Illinois, so I got to do this. So, let's say you are a reviewer. What would you look for in a conference proposal? What would be your criteria? Imagine if you're a professor who's looking at conference proposals and you have to decide and tell the conference committee, this is good, I like this, or this is bad, don't accept this person. What do you think they would be looking for? What do you think are the criteria they are looking for? Okay, talk to each other for a minute. What do you think would be the criteria for a passing conference proposal? What do you think they would look for, the proposal reviewers? What are they going to look for in a conference proposal or abstract? Any ideas? No?
First of all, if it has a specific format or structure,
Okay.
writer must meet it. If he doesn't meet, if he or she doesn't meet it, it's out.
Okay.
Then secondly, we want to see that the person has what has been done and what is new. If we can see that there's anything new that has been done, we don't want to bother ourselves.
Okay.
And must be relevant to the conference.
Oh, relevance, yes. Okay. So we have new, relevant, and we also have format. Let me talk about the format first. Especially more science, technology, engineering, math, STEM conferences, there might be a particular format that is expected. So for any conference, but especially in STEM fields where the format might be more specific, Go to past conferences, go to the website for past conferences, or get a conference booklet maybe from somebody, or go to other conferences and look at their abstracts. There's usually a conference booklet with all of the abstracts or proposals. Look at their format. For a particular conference, maybe go to the website for the last year's conference. They should have abstracts available from the presenters from the last conference or other conferences in the field. Look at what the format is like. If there's a particular format, and then follow that format. And just find out what abstracts or conference proposals look like. Often, the first paragraph might be background, but it's a very specific background because, again, you're writing to people who are experts in the field, so you don't need to tell them a lot. But your proposal should show that you know what you're talking about. You know about the previous research. You understand the previous research and what has been done. You've done your work, and you have a familiarity with all of the past research. It would look kind of embarrassing if there's really important research done by these people and you seem to not know about it. And so that's where maybe your professor, other professors can help you with your proposal. Relevant to the conference, of course, relevant to the field, naturally. Pick a conference that's appropriate. In my field of linguistics and education, some conferences are kind of more geared towards theory or more towards qualitative research. They probably wouldn't like my stuff because I'm quantitative. I like doing statistical analysis and experiments. And if I tried to present, it would probably make their heads explode with all of the statistics and stuff. They might chase me out. So find a suitable conference for what you're doing, or adapt it so that it's relevant to the conference. New. It should be something new and interesting. Do your homework. Don't just, it would be embarrassing if you propose something and you obviously didn't do a literature search and you didn't find that, well, some people have already done the same thing and they did it 2 years ago at another engineering conference. It would make you look silly and they're not going to accept your paper or your proposal. So make sure you've really searched the literature and what you're doing is really, really new and also interesting. And this is often the biggest problem if you're a new person in the field, a new PhD or master's student. It's really hard to know, has somebody really done this topic already? Again, you really have to search. Even your advisor may not know this. So you really, really have to do extensive search of the literature to make sure what you're doing is really new and interesting. Okay, what else?
I think the work should have also a theory that makes sense, at least. Not too complicated, but that makes sense. A good theory.
Okay, so, and it's also not too complicated. For many fields, probably some kind of a good theory and also application. It has some relevance at the end, the last minute or 2 minutes of you talking, and say, this is why my research is important, these are the implications or applications that are interesting. There's a clear, oftentimes in many fields, a clear connection between the theory and what your research is doing. A clear connection or basis in some theory in many fields, that's important. Okay, anything else? So as a conference reviewer, I'm looking for something that's specific, something that's new, something that's interesting, also something that can really be done in a 15-minute talk. And this is another mistake people make. They propose something that's really too much for a short 15-minute talk. Can this be done in 15 minutes? If not, you need to maybe make it more specific or break it up into something, break it up into little bits and then present one bit at one conference and another bit at a different conference. And then maybe later you can put it together and make a paper out of it if it's too much. In fact, I've got this handout on conference proposal samples, and I'm not going to talk through this, but these are actually my own that I've done in the past. Some of these are for small regional conferences, And so their style is a little, maybe not quite as formal or scientific. 1 and 2 are from small regional conferences in linguistics I did years ago when I was a new grad student. So is number 3. 4 also. 5, okay, let me talk about 5. 5 was one that failed. 5 was one that I submitted years ago and it didn't get accepted. Why? It was too ambitious. 5, my number 5 failed because it was too ambitious. It didn't get accepted. I was trying to propose a new theory. I thought, oh, I've got a cool new theory I want to propose, but that's too much. So you can be too ambitious and think, oh, I can propose a new theory or model at a conference. And it's probably not doable in 15 minutes. And my proposal was too broad, too ambitious. It's not clear necessarily that I really have something specific to talk about. It's too broad, too ambitious. It would have been better if I had, instead of trying to do something so ambitious, maybe break this up into little pieces and find maybe some empirical data that support maybe one hypothesis that follows from my theory, and then I can maybe do that and present part of my theory at a conference, not a whole new theory. Unless you're really brilliant like Noam Chomsky and you have half an hour, okay, maybe you can do that. But if you're a new grad student, probably not. Don't overestimate your ability. If you think you have something really new and exciting, it may be too much for a 15-minute talk. Break it up into something smaller. Find some good evidence or empirical data for a small part of it, present that. And then take another part of it, present that at another conference. Break it up into little bits. Don't be too ambitious. Don't try to present too much at once. And that's why this failed. Number 6 is a poster abstract I did for a international conference. Sometimes poster abstracts are really short. It's an abstract or a proposal for a poster for this one. Number 7 was a small international conference. So 7 is kind of a bit more social sciencey, scientific style. It's a bit more formal. It's pretty concise. For bigger conferences, the proposal might be longer, like this. There's just one little paragraph of background, very specific background, because the people already know this stuff. I only need to tell them what's really important, maybe some of them don't know some things. I set up the question, I describe the research method very briefly, because again, they probably know research methods well enough. I don't need to spend a long time to explain the research methods. Or if you're in humanities, and maybe the theoretical models or paradigms or theories that you work in, they probably know basically what this theory is. Don't need to spend a lot of time to explain it. Then I summarize the findings. I kind of contrast it with past studies a little bit, very briefly, and explain why my findings are cool, why it's interesting, why it's better, what advances did my research make, what are my findings, why is it important to people in the field. So I've made the case here. And that's why that was a decent proposal. And in your field, all you do is find conference booklets, programs, or online versions, and look at the proposals or abstracts that other people have done in your field, and you can learn from their style, because your style might be different from one field to another. But you can find online examples from the websites of different professional societies, or from actual conferences and the conference booklets. You can find examples of the abstracts that they have done, and you can learn from those and use those as models for your own proposals when you get to the point of submitting something for a conference. So those are the things that they're going to look for in evaluating your presentation. So let's say your proposal gets accepted and they send you a letter. You show to your department so your department can pay for your trip, maybe, if you're lucky, if your department has money. My department in grad school never had money, so I didn't. Got to prepare for your presentation then. You need to rehearse multiple times. Maybe rehearse with your classmates to give you some feedback. Or if your professor is willing, get some feedback from him on a rehearsal, him or her. Practice your use of maybe PowerPoint or visual aids. Practice a different time on your English delivery and your presentation skills. Practice separately your organization, structure, and flow. Practice multiple times, and each time focus on something else. During the actual presentation, then focus only on the content. During your presentation, you don't want to think about the English. You don't want to think about what do they think of me. Just think about the contents. You're trying to present your contents and you're trying to persuade them, and that should be clear from the way that you present, that you're focusing on the contents. You're not focusing on the PowerPoint, on your notes, or on your English, or something you've memorized. There are some, at the bottom of page 1, some general things you might want to think about for the introduction. Introduction should be short. If it's a 15-minute talk, for example, you don't have much time. Quick introduction, you kind of give a brief overview of what you're going to talk about and why it's important, maybe a rationale. Why should people care about this? Maybe a little background, very specific background that leads right up to your main point. There's some other kinds of things here that might be done in introduction. But basically, an introduction is going to be a brief overview of the main points you're going to present, why it's important, a brief statement of why your research is interesting, and why it's maybe an improvement over past research. And your conclusion might do the same thing. You might, again, say the same things in a conclusion. Because this is a conference presentation, you can repeat that at the intro and conclusion. During the middle of the talk, there's some things here on page 2, which is a summary of some of the contents of my booklet on lecture expressions. So, I have online from the website lecture expressions. This is also good for classroom teaching as well as conference presentations. I won't go through this. This is about 36 pages of some kinds of expressions you might use for either presentations or for classroom teaching. But think about how you're going to start the introduction. Sometimes you refer to visual aids. So sometimes I might draw your attention to the PowerPoint. For example, as you can see in this data graph, or as you can see in figure 2 or such, and make sure that you have graphs that are big enough for everyone to see. Other times, I want them to look at me. So if I'm focusing their attention on the PowerPoint, I'm going to step back. At other times, I'm going to talk freely, then I might walk in front of the PowerPoint. At some conferences, you might kind of have to stand here at the console. I've been in conferences like that. You still have a little bit of space where you can move around. You don't want to stand still like a statue. And I have seen that. I've seen people do that. They stand still. Move around a little bit, be interesting, and look at the people. Sometimes it might be possible for you to wander in front of the screen if you're not directly referring to the PowerPoint at the time. Because I want you to look at me, not the PowerPoint. I'm the teacher, not the PowerPoint. Transition expressions. Plan key transition expressions between slides and especially between sections of your talk. For example, we've looked at this, now I'd like to turn to blah, 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 or now let's look at blah, blah, blah. Notice I use maybe a transition word like now, or let's move on to, and such, or maybe first, second, third. But I also have maybe an intonation. When I say, now let's look at blah, blah, blah. The sentence starts with a high intonation. And we do this in English sometimes when you make a transition to a new topic. A high intonation at the start of a sentence, often with a transition word like, now let's look at, or next I would like to talk about blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes you kind of come back to a topic and say, anyway, or let's get back to, or as for, as regards. Sometimes you use an adverb at the beginning of a sentence, like, fortunately, regrettably, we did not replicate this result, or psychologically, economically, this is not feasible. So, and again, I have a high tone indicating a topic shift, and that kind of gets people's attention and kind of says, wake up, I'm moving to a different topic. Other transitions you might plan, there are contrasts, there are others in the booklet that you can look at depending on what your kind of talk you're giving. Sometimes hedges is a term in linguistics. So imagine if you have a house, like an American European house, and you have a hedge, bushes, shrub, that's to protect your property. Well, in linguistics, we talk about hedging expressions, which are things that are designed to kind of protect your face, your chaemyeon, your sense of personal face, or the other people's sense of face. And so one example in Korean might be 혹시, you say that a lot in Korean, that's a linguistic hedge. It's kind of making your statement more indirect. In other words, to protect your sense of face or the other person's sense of face by not being too direct. And there's a section in this booklet on hedges, somewhat, I think, maybe perhaps. So sometimes you want hedging expressions. You don't want to be too bold about your theory or your conclusions. Sometimes maybe, or this suggests that perhaps we should do more research on this, something like that. Sometimes you want to hedge yourself. Sometimes you want to emphasize this, like these results clearly show, or definitely show that such and such. So sometimes there are more emphatic expressions, and there's a section in the booklet on emphatic expressions highlighting other things. Let me draw your attention to da-da-da, or let me repeat this. These are kind of highlighting expressions. You might want to use highlighting expressions. Conclusions, kind of like the introduction, you probably want to remind people a summary of what you talked about, repeat your overview or your main points, explain again what you found that was interesting, different, better than before, and why it's cool, why it's important. Okay, and then hopefully you have time for questions. If you have rehearsed and practiced, cut out the unnecessary stuff. You have enough time for the allotted questions. Students always worry, even professors worry, what if they ask me a question I can't answer? Okay, what do? You've done all of this hard work, you've done a good presentation, you think you've anticipated questions, but they're going to ask you something you didn't expect. What do? They ask you something you don't know, you can't answer.
You haven't thought about it, I'll research more on that.
Pardon?
If you haven't thought about it, you will research more on it.
Okay, something kind of like that you want to say, because some people will make the mistake of trying to fake an answer, and you're just setting yourself up for failure. Admit that you don't know. It's okay. They know that you're just a grad student. They're not going to expect you to have all the answers. Now, it might be nice if your professor is there and he can help you, or she can help you, but that's not always the case. They may not be there. So you just say, I don't know. You can ask the audience, I don't know, do you all have any ideas? So you can ask the audience if they have ideas. But just say, I don't know, maybe you can give me some suggestions, or I don't know, I haven't thought about that. Be open and be willing to admit you don't know, but you welcome ideas for this. And just say, I don't know, that's an interesting question, I haven't thought about that, I'll look into that and consider that when I write this up. So something like that. Honestly, just say you don't know, but you would like, that sounds interesting. Maybe even thank them, that's a good question, I should consider that. Other things like that, again, rehearse and such. Use it on page 3, also talks about using technology properly. At a later session, I think it's in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk more about presentation and delivery methods. I'll talk more about PowerPoint, whether for teaching or for presentations. I'll talk more about things like delivery, using your voice, PowerPoint, and things like that. But I did talk a little bit about rehearsal. You need to rehearse. You need to think about your body language. Eye contact. Again, look at the audience as much as possible. Make sure your voice is not monotone. Your voice will be monotone sometimes if you are trying to say too much. So this is one problem. You try to cram in too many contents, you talk fast, and your voice becomes flat, monotone, and you put people to sleep. So avoid trying to say too much. Keep it simple so that you can talk slowly. Maybe make pauses between sentences. Pausing maybe a second between sentences, that helps people to understand. And your intonation. Practice your intonation. Especially guys tend to have more intonation problems, especially if you have a low voice or if you're not used to public speaking. Or in my case, I was really sick a couple of years ago, and I still have weak lungs, and I have to work extra hard for that. If you're tired, maybe do exercise so you have proper energy levels. Ladies, if you have kind of a weak voice, practice using your lungs. I'll talk about this more in about 2 weeks, I think. So make sure your voice is clear, audible, your intonation is clear, not flat, not monotone, not something that's going to put people to sleep. If you can't think of the right word, be aware that there are certain common verbs you can use at the top of page 3 in my handout. One thing is light verbs. If you can't think of the right verb, sometimes there are these light verbs. These are the most common English verbs. Sometimes you can fall back on these. Do, run, come, go, make, have, be, set, take, put. Sometimes these common verbs work, or other common verbs, other common words, something, anything, person, thing, and such. Sometimes those work when you can't think of the right word. Avoid Konglish expressions. If it's not on the website yet, I will put this up later. I've written a book on word choice problems to avoid. It's kind of an anti-Konglish manual. A lot of it is for academic writing, but some of it is also applicable to speaking. So, what kind of shirt am I wearing? What do you call it in Korean? White shirts? In English, that makes no sense. It's a dress shirt. Okay, so this is a dress shirt. And whether it's a conference presentation or if it's afterward when you're chatting with people and networking, this is relevant too. This is a dress shirt. What kind of shirt, Isaac, can you show them the kind of shirt that you're wearing? What kind of shirt is that? No. That is a polo shirt. Or also that gentleman back there. It's a polo shirt. 3 buttons, collar, maybe a little horsey here or something. It's a polo shirt. I don't see anyone wearing a t-shirt. A t-shirt has no collar. Okay, that is a t-shirt. That's a t-shirt. That's a polo shirt. That's a polo shirt. So avoid, especially, maybe more likely when you're talking to people afterwards at the conference banquet, after a session, and such. Konglish expressions, be aware of. That's in the booklet. And also this gets down to section 4.6, other cultural matters. One, avoid Konglish expressions they might not know, especially at an international conference. Dress and appearance. If you're presenting a poster or talk, you should dress up. At least business smart dress. Something formal like this would be ideal, or at least maybe if you don't have a tie, maybe that's okay, but at least a dress shirt and some nice pants or something equivalent for ladies. If you're not presenting that day, maybe you can dress like at least a polo shirt. That's okay. For an international conference, we're a little more informal. But if you're presenting, you should dress up. If you're not presenting, business casual or polo shirt and jeans, okay. If you're just wearing a t-shirt at a conference, even if you're not presenting, it kind of looks, well, a little unprofessional, even if you're not presenting. Now a lot of people from America, especially California, Australians, they might dress like that at a conference, but if you're starting your new academic career, it's better if you make an impression. So if you're not presenting on a particular day, at least polo shirt or business casual. When you're presenting, you know, dress up. Even if some guy from California or Australia who's a tenured professor gives a talk wearing a t-shirt, okay, maybe they have enough power and prestige they can get away with it, although it's not really professional, they can get away with it. But you are working on making an impression, so it's better if you dress a little more formal than the sloppy Western people. Yeah, again, something, if you're presenting, then something formal, semi-formal style. It's kind of hard for me to advise women how to dress, but something that looks formal or semi-formal, business semi-formal as such. If you're not presenting, then at least not street clothes, if you want to make a good impression. So yeah, not street clothes, but something a little more better than that. If you're not presenting, I think the way most of you ladies are dressed right now is probably okay. That looks, I don't know, little flannel is a little informal, but I don't know, maybe okay, sure. But if you're presenting, definitely dress up. If you're at an international conference, okay, I know guys here wear pink, but to other cultures, it's a little odd for a guy to wear pink. I know Western attitudes towards homosexuality are tolerant now, but maybe you don't want to be mistaken for that. So guys wearing a pink shirt or pink tie, it might be misunderstood. It's not a big deal, but it might be misunderstood. So if you're wearing a pink shirt, don't be surprised if some other guy tries to flirt with you. I don't know, it's not a terribly big deal, but they might think so. Name cards, little cultural difference. We're not as big about name cards as Koreans are. When I've gone to conferences here, I've seen like older Korean professors hand their name cards to everybody. That doesn't actually look good in Western culture. It's kind of like, I am great, I'm super important, you should all have my name card. It gives that kind of impression. So we would exchange, well, we call it a business card. We would exchange it if we really expect to want to contact that person. I think in Korean culture, you just do it with everybody. But I think in Western culture, it's more like you exchange it if you really think you might want to be in contact with that person. If there's some expectation of wanting to contact that person, then you would do it. Otherwise, it might be excessive if you're just handing out to everybody. Body language, again, during your talk, pay attention to your body language. We'll actually talk about body language, I think, in a couple of weeks. But things like eye contact, not appearing nervous. There are certain things with your body language, whether you're giving a talk or if you're just socially interacting, talking to people at the conference. There are things about your body language that might look too nervous, like scratching, rubbing yourself, crossing your body with your arms or such. We'll talk about that more later in a couple of weeks. But eye contact. This is a bit of a cultural difference. Westerners do more direct eye contact than Koreans. And so don't be too embarrassed. Like, for example, if you ladies are at an international conference and some American or European guy is making more direct eye contact with you than what you're accustomed to, it's just the Western culture. I myself have become kind of Asianized because I've been in Asia for so long now, so I don't do as much direct eye contact, especially with females, but don't be surprised or too offended if they do some direct eye contact with you. In fact, if you avoid direct eye contact, Westerners might think that you're hiding something or you're unfriendly or you're too nervous. So you don't have to necessarily adapt fully, but maybe partially adapt. if you're at a conference and you're trying to socialize and network, another thing is proxemics, and there are some cross-gender differences here too. Let me get you and you to stand up, you two, and imagine you two are meeting for the first time. Show us how. Okay, so could you move out here? Okay, kind of move out into the aisle. And okay, so Isaac, what's your name? Inji. So how far, if you're meeting him for the first time, how far away would you stand from him?
Enough to shake hands.
Okay, like that? Yeah. Okay. Now, as an African, how far away would you stand from a female? Like her, if you're meeting for the first time?
I think an arm's length is okay. Arm's length is just the personal space, so.
Okay.
It's okay.
So kind of like this. Okay. Americans, I think, might stand a little bit closer. And a Northern European, even between genders, might come right up in your face. It's scary, right? But North Europeans or other European cultures, they might come really close to you, even between male and female. And don't be too freaked out about that. Okay, thanks. You can sit down. It kind of surprised me the first time I interacted with German females, and they stood really close to me. So Asians tend to stand further apart, especially between male and female. Americans tend to be a little bit closer, and Europeans, especially North Europeans, might get even closer in a way that might make you feel uncomfortable. And it can be awkward, like they're coming to you like that and you're backing away, and they're going, "What's wrong?" And they come closer and you back away. And I've actually had this experience myself the first time I interacted with very conservative Taiwanese females. And I didn't know about this. This is called proxemics, how far away you stand from a person and personal space and such. Different cultures have different values about personal space, and you may see this when you're interacting with people at international conferences. And there are other things. Again, people from some cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, may be very conservative about interactions between male and female. But some of them might have spent some time in Western culture, and they might be more accustomed to international proxemics and body language and amount of eye contact and things like that. So those are some things, some tips, because you'll probably be going hopefully to international conferences, also meeting people who may be trained in British English, and so they make, it could be people from England, it could be people from continental Europe or the Middle East who studied British, people from Hong Kong and Singapore who studied British English, and they speak with kind of a mixed British Chinese accent, like Hong Kong accent, Singaporean accent, and such, and other kinds of English. So you will encounter other kinds of English beyond the American English that you might have been exposed to also. So that's something to watch out for. Watch some Doctor Who before you go to international conferences, basically. Okay, any questions? Okay, so the next two sessions will be talking more about presentation, delivery skills. I think next week is more about pronunciation and delivery, and 2 weeks later more about presentation skills. All right, thanks, and if you want to pick up any hard copies you've turned in to me, you can, or give me some hard copies or send me stuff by email if you are in the certificate program. All right, thanks.